All right, I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jared Rahman from Divine. I'm a strategic solutions consultant, and today we're talking about AI risk assessment. Let me quickly introduce you who you're hearing from because context matters. Nemo Sear Johnson is the founder and CEO of Vasili Advisory Group. She has spent over 2 decades working directly with Fortune 500 leadership teams on cybersecurity, risk, and governance. Her work sits at the intersection of business strategy and technical reality, especially when it comes to AI. Cy Ruckschiff is a cybersecurity solutions consultant at Divine. He has led risk management, business continuity programs at organizations like Google, Invesco, and the HCL, and now focuses on AI GRC, AI safety, and AI security engineering. He works hands-on with teams who are already in production, not theory. You're going to hear two different but complementary perspectives today, one from the boardroom and one from engineering and risk execution layer. So I just want to go over some quick housekeeping before we dive in. This session is being recorded. You will get the recording afterward. Please hold the questions for the Q&A at the end so we can keep the flow tight. If you want to speak, use the raise hand option and we will bring you in. If your audio drops, leave and rejoin. If that fails, please message the host. All right, let's talk about why this conversation exists in the first place. I want to frame this a little bit differently before we even look at the numbers on the slide. Nima, from your or rather leadership perspective, what actually changed in the last 12 to 18 months?
Good question. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. What has changed in the last 12 months? I think the biggest one is accountability is no longer negotiable. Um, it's AI is driving immediate decisions in hiring, immediate decision in lending, immediate decisions in clinical, and the regulators are taking notice of this. So the governance structure that we had over the years is no longer applicable with the AI age that we're in right now. When I ask who's at the top of the authority chain, what happens when something goes wrong? When the room goes quiet, that's concerning. It's
Okay.
not an algorithm issue. It's an accountability issue.
Appreciate
Thank you, Nima. And loss of control shows up really clearly in another signal on the slide. Despite the attention, most AI incidents still lack basic controls, not advanced ones, basic ones. So, Sai, you kind of see this up close. Why does that gap keep appearing, you think?
Yeah, man, well iterated, Yaver. Forget about the advanced controls. The basic ones are missing. Where exactly these basic ones start, right? Right from the stage of design. Okay, so if I want to build my AI stack, right, and I'm designing it, so yeah, how exactly I layer my defense around my design. So that's missing from the initial days. And instead of AI systems hallucinating, the designers, the architects are hallucinating. I'm sorry to make this statement, but that is how it is looking like right now. Most AI systems enter organizations through their product innovation teams, their R&D teams, right? But not risk or security functions, unfortunately, right? So models are just being prioritized before ownership, monitoring, and how exactly things needs to be escalated, right? If something goes wrong. So yeah, I mean, I feel like controls that work for traditional software were reused, even though AI behaves very differently, right? So I think that is where the gaps keep appearing. I would say reappearing, yeah, for that matter.
Thank you, Sai. So I think the takeaway from this slide is pretty straightforward. AI risk is rising because these systems scale quickly, behave unpredictably, and are now regulated like core infrastructure, which brings us to a real issue. Now I want everyone to kind of mentally compare two different situations. A payment API throws errors versus an AI model that quietly starts making worse decisions over time. Most organizations are built to handle the first scenario, but they're not built to detect or govern the second one. This is the gap that this slide is pointing at. Nima, from a governance standpoint, where does traditional risk thinking break down first?
My goodness, static assessments are so outdated, right? We can no longer depend on those. Traditional risk management assumes the system would behave exactly the same the day you deployed it, and possibly minor changes over patching, updates, feature updates, etc. But with AI, it's currently learning as it's being built. And it's learning, it's introducing new risk. So my way of looking at traditional risk is no longer consumable for the AI age. But what I'm looking for is more dynamic risk postures, which is continuous checkpoints throughout the development and not a calendar annual check, which we traditionally used to.
Thank you, Nima. And I think that difference sounds abstract until you see it play out operationally. Sai, from what you see, what is the moment teams realize AI risk is not behaving like traditional risk?
Yeah, let's take an example, right? Let's say there's a model. That particular model is passing its validation at the deployment phase, right? And I'm just looking out for any bias kind of behavior, right? That looks acceptable because all the variance level stays intact and my guardrails are in place, right? So I just take the paper with all the check boxes, tick all the check boxes, and once the real usage starts, right? Let's say it's 9 a.m. Central, and there are a lot of data distributions are shifting. There are a lot of people prompting, right? And it's 12 p.m., right? You can definitely change the way. I mean, you can definitely notice the way, right? The model changes its behavior by 12 p.m. noon Central, right? And okay, it's slowly more after 3 or 4 hours, right? It's 4 p.m. end of business, let's say, right? So on a whole, it's something like a lot of prompts came in. The model handled a lot of prompts, right? The edge cases increases because a lot of users have different, expectations on their use case, how exactly they want to use the model, right? So, and there you go. Like the model starts behaving very differently, right? But it acts like it is normal, right? There is no notification alarming system out there, right? So, and once my team who built this comes into the picture, right? And if they see something fishy and they try to reproduce an issue, they just cannot, right? Same prompt, different output, same model version, different behavior, right? That is because AI risk is not tied to single failure event, unfortunately. It's never a single point of failure, right? It is tied to ongoing exposure. So, and once AI is connected to automation, let's take an example of that scenario, right? So even small deviations will really scare into worse scenarios. So yeah, that's how it goes, yeah. Where I mean, like that's when the moment teams really realize AI risk is a little different to traditional risk, and the price they pay is very big. Yeah,
And
Awesome.
it's
And I
funny you
think,
should say that. You should say that it's changing every hour. Imagine that operating in 25 countries, right?
yeah,
Back in the day when I was leading the Walgreens programs,
yeah,
we are operating in 25 countries. We're operating in 25 possible languages. And so everyone is using AI. Scale that to this day and age, it would be an impossible task to manage without continuous monitoring.
yeah.
right.
Agreed.
Thank you both. Yeah, so I think the real message is that traditional risk assumes systems stabilize after release. AI systems don't do that. They drift, adapt, and respond to their environment. Traditional risk assumes fixes remove the risk. AI risk requires continuous constraints, monitoring, and escalation. Once you accept that, the next question becomes almost unavoidable. If AI risk is continuous and multidimensional, what kind of risks are actually present across the AI lifecycle? Not just model accuracy, but data, deployment, operations, and abuse. This is where we go next.
Yeah,
So up to now, we've been talking about how AI risk behaves differently. This slide answers a more practical question people usually ask internally, even if they have to phrase it differently. What exactly can go wrong? Where does it show up? And why does it not fit neatly into one risk bucket? Nima, when leaders look at AI risk, what do they usually underestimate first?
Ownership every single time. Leaders underestimate the crucial need for a named owner, an empowered individual who's accountable for each AI use case. Somebody who can look at the use case and go, yes, this is what good looks like. Oh no, we made a wrong turn here. How do we go back and start fresh? Uh, the assumption is this in this example that I that I experienced real time, AI goes live and the CISO walks into the office of this steering committee, and the CISO assumes it's a legal issue, watching what legal would say. And then legal assumes it's an IT issue. What would IT say? And IT says it's a business issue. Who really owns it? Right. And so ownership is really important. When something goes wrong, there has to be somebody with authority and who's obligated to act immediately so that the issue does not become a material risk for the company.
Thank you, Nima. And that's, I think, the top-down view. Sai, when you look at the side from the ground level, what do these risks look like in the technical sense?
They just don't occupy one corner of the system or one layer of the system, right? They they are over they're all over the different layers of the system, to be honest, because when we think of data quality issues, right, the surface has biased or inconsistent outputs, and the model drift gradually degrades the decision making, right? And again, that's not a sudden failure. Something is already cooking from day one, right? So, and whenever I think of, okay, an AI system is maybe giving me a 90% accurate answer, right? But how can it explain as a system on which it is trained, right? Uh, what exactly it is giving, how exactly it explains itself. It goes for a toss in many situations, right? And other thing I could think of is agentic behavior, right? So when these agentic AI systems are introduced, right? A lot of trust issues come into picture because systems start acting beyond narrow prompts, right? They really go beyond what you ask them to do sometimes because they just feel that's right. No one told them, and that's not their mistake, right? I'm not taking a corner for agentic AI systems because they work well with certain tasks, but yeah, that's how it is. And shadow AI, me as a user sitting on my laptop in my corporate environment, right? So I just don't know uh, what on what scale am I using AI just to make my life better in my 9 to 5 job, right? So shadow AI and adversarial users, right, expand the attack surface without visibility. Even if you want to track something, it's a way beyond than your imagination. So I mean, this is basically compounding risk, right? So, and most monitoring tools still look at this risk in isolation, unfortunately. So, yeah, I mean, this is how the risk look like technically, yeah.
Thank you, Sai and Nima. And I think the real takeaway here is pretty simple. AI risk does not show up as one clean problem. It shows up as a bunch of different issues that reinforce each other. If you treat bias, security, explainability, and misuse as separate problems, you'll always be late. The teams that stay ahead will stop asking, is the model working? They ask, how could this system fail at this scale? So that question leads directly to structured risk assessment. I think this slide makes one thing pretty clear. When large enterprises talk about AI risk publicly, they're not talking about model accuracy. They're talking about reputation, cybersecurity, and regulation. And that trend is accelerating year over year, as you can see, which tells us something important. AI risk is already being treated as a material business risk, not a technical edge case. Once risk shows up in a 10K, it means boards, legal teams, and regulators are already involved in the process. So the question is no longer whether AI risk matters. The question is whether internal controls actually match what organizations are now disclosing externally. Um, Anything that you or Nima want to add here?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, see, the numbers, I believe by today they might be they might have gotten already exponentiated, not even multiplied, right? It is unfortunate. The unfortunate thing is that we just don't know the exact numbers yet because we are miserably failing. How exactly are we gauging them? How are we assessing them, right? So I think it is very uh, it is very scary the way AI risk, different kind of AI risk are evolving, right? and impacting different aspects of the business, reputation, ethical consideration, legal and regulatory, not only cyber, but also a lot of, you know, it's like getting into a place where you're not trusted anymore, right? It is impacting your trustworthiness. So, yeah,
Yeah, I think the only thing I can add here is the bias and fairness, right? When we talk about enterprise risk, um, there's things that are soft things that you can go, yeah, we'll be okay with that. But there are things that are so big that it becomes hard to ignore. And
yeah.
leaders need to pay attention to those trends and see how best we can do to address those.
Thank you, Nima and Sai. So, if AI risk is showing up as reputational, regulatory, and cybersecurity exposure, the next logical question, I think, becomes where is that risk actually coming from? I think this slide answers that. AI risk is not something that appears at deployment and disappears after launch. It exists across the entire life cycle. Sai, walk us through what this actually looks like in practice.
I think, you know, the way uh, most teams estimate when do a risk come up with an AI system, right? It is way before than you even imagine, right? The day you just you're asleep, you're a decision maker and you're asleep and you want to put a proposal tomorrow in your boardroom saying that okay, let's bring AI into action. That is a risk right there. You're thinking of AI, right? So
Right.
most teams underestimate how early AI risks start, right? Uh, and all of anything you relate to AI, as artificial intelligence, right? It is taking natural intelligence species into it, right? Getting trained on it in a different way and giving you some intelligence so that you're getting into a delusional like theme that okay, it can replace every human being out there, right? I know I'm sounding sarcastic here, but this is how it is actually working right now. Like it begins with how exactly is the AI stack acquiring its data, right? uh, the data on which it is being trained might be biased, incomplete, or might be some data that is already gone for toss legally. Yep, right. If your foundation base is weak, everything that is built on it is basically planning itself to fail on a grand scenario or grand situation. Yeah, and during model design and training phases, very early, right? Risk shows up in how objectives are optimized, right? So even though these models are being fine tuned for performance, right, it quietly increases the bias, hallucinations, and overconfidence. Yeah, and so now we just spoke about how exactly they can be developed and the risk that comes in the development phase and the data acquisition phase and when we are about to deploy it, thinking that oh, okay, now my variance levels are in balance. There is no underfitting or overfitting, right? That is where your actual attack surface opens up. As a bad guy, I'll be just looking for that model, a vulnerable model to come live so that I can make some prompt injection. I can just make your model work in a reverse way, literally. Like I can extract it and I can decide how exactly it needs to work, right? And every model out there, the response it gives is based upon how many tokens are you spending for it to respond. So if I'm a bad guy, I will hit on your token utilization so that you ran out of your wallet. You do not have any more monetary substance that you can invest to purchase those tokens, right? And get into uh, like a denial of wallet situation, right? So the mistake most organizations make in treating uh, all of this as isolated phases. If you look at it right from stage one, if you have had a proper policy, governance, right, your risk and complaints would have been taken care automatically, which you did not, and now you're in question. So I think from development to deployment, across the entire life cycle, this is how the AI risk is existing, Yavar.
And a flawed foundation compromises everything,
Yeah,
right? When data sets are not articulated accurately, the model is learning from that. Therefore, the decision that which is the output of the input that we made is also flawed. So, what data are we collecting? How are we curating the data? What assumptions are we providing engineers as they're building these models? All those things become very foundational, but they're necessary. So for lifecycle management, I think it's no longer a negotiable thing. We have to implement it. It has to be effective enough to manage risk across the entire lifecycle for AI.
yeah,
Well put. So I think the message of the slide is pretty straightforward. AI risk is not a single checkpoint. It's a chain of decisions made across the entire life cycle. If you assess risk at only one point, you miss how it was introduced earlier and how it will evolve later, which leads us to the next step. If AI risk spans the entire life cycle, how do organizations actually assess it consistently and defensively? I think up to now we've talked about why AI risk is different and where it shows up. The obvious next question most teams ask is which framework are we supposed to use? Well, I would just like to say from my experience that it's not about picking one framework and calling it done. It's about using the right frameworks for the right purpose. So,
yeah.
sorry, could you give us more of a practical view of this?
I think right before you think about any framework that you want to pick, right? Understand your business first. What exactly does your business deal with? Okay. Where do your people operate? Where are your process? Where is your technology? And what is the intersection point they work hand in hand? Okay. That will help you understand which framework will really suit me the best. Because frameworks are the hardware or software requirements that universally are accepted. Oh, okay, a 8-digit password is something I can really, choose for my company because that's a universal framework that someone is using. I know I'm just taking a layman example, but yeah, because each of these frameworks solve different problems, yeah, right? And sometimes they solve different problems, and for a single problem, they solve different parts of the problem, right? So the way you scope it and tailor it, okay, is very much important. We have a really repeated frameworks here for AI risk assessment methodologies, right? So if we just think of ISO 42K1 AIMS, it's a full stack, right? It will give you the whole governance picture of uh, how you uh, how you govern and maintain your GRC around AI systems, right? It covers everything end to end. It helps you with managing your AI systems, accountability part of it, and how can you repeat it, like plan to check act, yeah, and continuous improvement in the act phase. So this really matters when auditors and regulators show up. Okay, they really have a management system for their whole entire stack. Okay, right? They might be compliant with whatever the requirements are, right? It shows up that, but again, people run after the non-conformity reports and they have like just 2 weeks of time to fix everything. So all of this really gets into the picture. Yeah. And
Hmm.
speaking of MITRE Atlas and OWASP Top 10 LLM, right now, this is the best base everyone got to gauge or to understand how AI systems are actually abused, right? Not how we hope they are used, definitely. Okay. And that is where Google SAIF brings all of this together on an operational level. It focuses on securing AI systems end to end, right? From the stage of data acquisition, engineering to deployment, right? With practical engineering guardrails. Yeah, if something needs to be tightened and hardened, yeah, I go for Google SAIF. That is really helping me. Okay, with whatsoever architecture I have, this is how I got to harden it. Simple as that, right? So all of the examples which I just gave, yeah, where if you just try to put a full stop in between them, that doesn't work. You always have to keep a comma, right? You have to add upon layer by layer, sandwich that so that it will help you protecting your AI stack. Yeah,
Right. And I believe frameworks are the floor, not the ceiling, right? We've seen every framework has ability to say you must have an escalation process. you must document your residual risk. You must assign ownership. That's what frameworks are telling you. But they don't tell you who in your organization has the authority to accept that specific risk. What is your specific threshold for when what is acceptable and what is not? And
Yeah.
who signs off on the change approval when something goes wrong? Who specifically declares an incident when an events are happening and they're all agentic, right? Like I'm talking agents to agent attacking each other, and you're sitting over here going, "We need a framework for that." There's not going to be a
Yeah.
framework for that, right? And
Yeah.
so because they're happening as we're building, so I really implore people to focus on frameworks, yes, because they help us set the structure for how we should govern, but they're not determining exactly what's happening within the organization.
100%. I
Thank
know.
you.
What exactly are you smiling at, Nima? Yeah, the anthropic situations, right? So other models are attacking few models which are working properly, right? So we are in a very different era, team, right? That is really scary. It's something like an tech bio war now on the models to models kind of situation. So yeah, well brought up, Nima. Yeah, really appreciate that.
Mhm.
Thank you both. Yeah, so I think, like Nima said, I don't think the goal is necessarily framework compliance. I think the goal is more so consistent, defensible risk decisions across all the AI use cases. Once that structure exists, the next challenge becomes obvious. How do you actually measure AI risk in a way leaders can act on, not just document? So I think this is where we go next. Most teams, they start with controls, prompt filters, confidence thresholds, monitoring dashboards. This slide is saying those controls only work if governance decisions already exist. Nima, from your side, what specifically breaks when governance is missing?
Oh, I can go so deep in this. But anyway, let me stick to the high level. Clarity breaks down, right? The structure on ambiguity is probably driving. And lastly, we see a lot of chaos. So I can give examples of that. When a vendor like Microsoft decides to push Copilot, the business was not intending to own it immediately. They were like, well, it's here, so let's do it. But if you have a governance structure, you can say, yes, it's here. Yes, it's operating within our environment. Yes, it's driving efficiencies for our team members. But what other risk is it introducing? So when governance comes first, what you're seeing is that whenever the supply chain decides to implement something like Copilot, the vendor itself has to be validated that they built this model based on actual ethical ways and that it cannot be misused to expose more information that is internal to you to the world in which it's handling it. One example that I can share, and I think I shared with this publicly a couple of days ago, which is in public, the board is asking, do we have AI? Right? In private, they're asking, do we have an app? And in public, they're like, oh God, what is it doing? Right? So you're having these confusing mindsets between what's happening really internally and what's being reflected externally. Engineers are also looking at this. What is really approved? What can we use based on what is our appetite for the organization? So I started saying that clarity is breaking down, ambiguity sets in, and definitely chaos around the organization without the lack of good governance.
I think that's well explained, Nima. Sai, I want us to get a little bit more concrete. How does this show up technically inside AI systems?
Right. I mean, like the way it shows up on the technical front is you cannot really control the way the AI is drifting from hard to hard, right? So that's like you got no control over the control drift, right? And the alert fatigue. Yeah. So something, let's say we employed an alerting system, right? That is alerting us with uh, some concerning responses of AI system, right? AI itself doubts if that is a proper alert or not, right? The monitoring system, basically. Okay. So teams that deploy monitoring for model accuracy, confidence scores, bias metrics, prompt abuses, right? All of this. But governance never define thresholds that is tied to business impact. That is a major concern. Okay. So I think without governance defined triggers, engineering teams are just equipping some monitoring systems out there. They feel that they have used their budget well efficiently, right? But it is just that one more tech stack getting added to its asset inventory and showing up there and closely monitoring AI systems, doing a lot of triggering alerts which are wrong, right? So the control exists, but they are not operationally binding because there's a lack of governance out there. What needs to happen when and why and who owns it if something else happens? Yeah.
I think
Thank
the
you.
only
So
thing I can contribute, the only thing I can contribute there is knowing your asset, knowing the behavior, knowing your
Yeah.
exposure,
Yeah.
right? All those things are really key in making sure oversight is operating effectively.
well put. I think so. I think controls don't fail because they're badly built. They kind of fail because they're not anchored to clear governance decisions. Once governance defines ownership thresholds and escalations, I think that's when controls become effective, which brings us to the next question. How do you actually translate those governance decisions into measurable AI risk scores that leadership can actually act on? So I want to make this a little bit more real. Sai, can you walk us through how this works using a real world AI deployment?
I'd love to do that. I mean, like, let's take a very, very common example or common use case, right? So there are a lot of these customer facing chatbots these days, right? So these chatbots they really have some stunning UI UX, cutting edge. They looks like a machine gun, right? Taking all the data from the brain, which is a large language model, right? Behind that. And I'm a customer. I'm facing this cutting edge so-called AI assistant, right? And I'm basically seeking its help to uh, do some financial transaction. Okay. So it answers about my account summary. It explains me different products that the financial institution is offering these days. Yeah, they say insurance 1+1 offer. You don't die twice, something like that. So all of this as advertisements comes up, selling me products, and it occasionally routes me to next steps. So if you just try to see this here, I'm here facing this AI system as a customer for one purpose. Okay. Even though you're not coming straight to the point, that's okay, but make it relevant. Are you at least explaining your steps? No, you're not. There, your explainability gone for toss. That's a very big risk because I got an emergency where I really have to make a transaction, and that is impacting me, a hundred different ways. And now you're just being an AI assisted system, explaining me about a tagline that you don't die twice, and explaining me about a insurance, plan that I never needed. So what exactly is happening? So if you just try to score what is the impact and probability that this is happening, right? Just think of it. I'm one customer, and there are 10 other customers or 100 other customers using this live facing 24/7 model or AI assistant. Okay. Thousands of interactions you could think of if you think if you are like scaled or if you are already scaled in different geographies, right? And you're gone for toast. Now fast forward just 6 months. Okay, let's say this is day one and the AI assistant is not in a mood of working properly. And after 6 months, I come back, right? And I look at it. What exactly I see? I don't see any change in there until some miracle happens because the users gets double. The assistants start being reused internally for some use case, right? And it focuses on the exact use case and doesn't really care about what exactly the user needs. So here, the very minimal part of decision making that it needs to do is just missing, right? So what exactly is the CVP, the core value proposition that it is facing the customer and delivering? Nothing. Rather, it is harassing the customer, right? So yeah, go ahead, Nima. Yeah,
I was just laughing. It's not just harassing the customer.
yeah.
I have a business, and every so often the AI agent is like, "Why are you not enabling AI agent?" I turned it off exactly for that. How may I help you? How may I help you? I was like, I really don't need any help. I'm just literally browsing, right? And then on the other side, where the AI agent makes something really impactful to the business, I gave an example when we spoke earlier about Air Canada, right? The agent was doing its job, what it was trained to do, but in this case, it added an additional spin to it by offering discounts to customers. Legality, from that perspective, Air Canada tried to push that back on the technology, but this was a decision making issue, right? It wasn't the technology did not fail. The technology was trained to do what it was trained to do. And
Yeah.
so they ended up being held liable for that issue. But I think you're right about the behaviors that the agents might have. But I think the output must be owned by whoever is signing off on the value proposition for the company.
Thank you, Sai and Nemo. Yeah, so I think this is like a good example of, what these AI agents is the likelihood drifts over time.
Mhm.
Nemo, how do you think this kind of shows up from a governance angle?
Decision making is not documented, it's not defensible, and there's no named owner, right? So when I work in audit, and auditors are my friends ish, and so as being an auditor myself, I'm not asking about what technology exists. I'm asking how is this decision helping you make decisions. So for example, when I ask three questions are what AI systems support your mission critical processes, how decisions are being made with those systems, and who's actually accountable for monitoring those decisions so that you don't end up in some material risk. So the goal here as an operator is to operate in a way that confirms that decisions was made top down as opposed to be reactive, and that resulting in the incident that we saw with Air Canada.
Thank you. Thank you, Nima. So I think, AI risk change the scale, usage, and context, and, things such as building scoring mechanisms that respond to that change automatically. If risk scoring doesn't alter system behavior, I don't think it's really real risk management. Which brings us to the final step. What do mature organizations actually implement to enforce these decisions at runtime? So what do experts do differently? Sai, can you walk us through this from the ground level?
Yeah, definitely. What exactly do experts do differently? Right? Great question. Yeah, I would really appreciate that. So they just start thinking with some common sense, right? That is the very first thing to do. Because in this age of AI, we are treating that as a major uh, supernova in the technology shift. It is just one other, workload that is adding, sitting on your cloud, taking all your resources, more memory, more energy, right? Yeah, impacting your carbon footprint for that matter. I know the statement I'm making is little deviating from the questions you have asked, but as an expert, I would keep everything in mind. It also got caveats with the super astounding things that it is doing, right? So always assume a breeze. There is a risk. Accept that, irrespective of how much money you have invested in it, right? It is bringing you, some risk. The blast radius is already expanded, right? The threat landscape is out there waiting for you to get materialized. Yeah. So what expert teams understand is that AI risk doesn't show up in one place. They understand that uh, it is like widespread. So are the controls. The controls cannot really sitting in one corner controls the entire AI stack or secures the entire AI stack. They have to be split. They have to be layered, right? They have to be baked in, not bolted on. I always say this, right? If you're just failing to plan all this, right? Congrats, my friend. You're planning to fail. Simple as that. So they start by assuming the prompts, inputs, and even internal users are untrusted. That's how experts think, right? And they think about the design level, shift left approach, even if that's AI or ZI. Yeah, right. Always do that. And respecting your own company policy. Enforce the policy from ground level. And from there, from there, like everything changes, how we see things, right? So when those probes are l- signals that show elevated risk, AI system working really well, and all of a sudden, uh, the signals it gives seems to be like really tricky to believe, okay, if we are at risk or it is just one of those system intended behavior as per the use edge case is changing, right? So all of this, as an expert, how exactly I see is I look at the architecture, I look at my redeeming help where they can break things, they can convey me how exactly CIA is being impacted and what does that mean to me, right? And I would also always involve a human in the loop where major decisions are decided by us and we are not just giving all our intelligence to an artificial system and asking it to make decisions, right? And penultimately, these AI stacks, they are wholesome and they are literally dependent on different, I would say, items to be built on, right? You pick some memory components from somewhere, and you pick some logic from somewhere, right? And there are you pick your firmware which supports your AI system from somewhere, right? So all this supply chain, what is the guarantee that it is not tampered or counterfeit? Definitely, right? So in IT, but IT security, we called it supply chain now, supply chain risk management now, because that is entirely dependent on the SBOM, supply chain billing of materials, right?
Mhm.
And in AI, there should be a proper AI bill of materials that needs to be invented that says, okay, this is your actual asset inventory and this is what it is built upon, so that you have a practical, uh, clarity about what risk are you dealing with, right? And ultimately, how exactly are you layering different security initiatives around the AI stack, right? If your AI system is sitting in the garden, right? It looks so shiny, but it is surrounded by a lot of things around external exposure. So how are you building a layer defense out there is something really important. So that's how expert teams do think and operate.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you, Seth.
the only thing I can add is it learns, it drifts, it responds differently.
Yeah.
So we need to change as it changes. So
Thank you both. Yeah, so Nima, from a leadership perspective and governance perspective, why do these exact practices make the difference when scrutiny hits?
I think the biggest thing when scrutiny comes to play in our organization, the last thing people need is to point fingers, right? And that seems to happen in a non-governed organization because nobody says, "I did that," right? Or nobody says, "Because of this decision, this happened," right? It all comes down to we have a new technology, let's adapt it, let's adapt it quickly without really thinking about the materiality of what could happen if it goes wrong. So I think about it from like leadership perspective is an example is procurement receives a new third party product. They only assess it based on their view of procurement. But when we have a cohesive assessment program, it won't be we only have like SBOM, like the like Asai mentioned, but it looks at all the controls cohesively, and that allows it to move forward without any hiccups, or at least minimize the hiccups because we never have risk at zero. But I think when I'm operating as a leader, I want to make sure there's cohesiveness across all these business functions. Nothing is left, no stone is left unturned.
Thank you,
Well
Nima.
said,
So
Nima.
I think if you take a step back, I don't think this slide's really about advanced tooling. I think it's more about discipline. Experts assume models will drift, inputs would be abused, and context will change. So they build systems that validate inputs, test behavior continuously, escalate intelligently, track provenance, and contain failures by design. I think that's the difference between reacting to AI risk and actually running it in production.
Yes.
So before we open up this for questions, I want to land one final thought. AI risk is not something you solve once, it's something you design for, measure continuously, and enforce deliberately. The difference
Yeah.
between struggling teams and mature teams is not really intent, it's whether risk decisions are engineered into a system or debated after something goes wrong. With that, the experts are open to have all your questions answered. Please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll take as many as time allows. So I'll give it about a minute or two. Okay, I think rather than waiting for more to come in, that we have our first question. I think I'll direct this one to you, Sai. So at what stage do you usually recommend running an AI risk assessment?
Uh, Good question, Yaver. I would say every stage possible. Like if you are just considering development and deployment, yeah, do it in the both phases, right? If you're considering planning, development, deployment, yeah, do it in the three phases you want. Yeah, just inculcate it at every possible phase, right? So teams that wait until deployment mostly end up documenting risk instead of reducing it to their appetite. Yeah.
Thank you, Sai. And I think we have another question that I'll still direct towards you. In your experience, which part of the AI lifecycle do you think tends to get the least attention?
I believe it's post deployment because like we are in a chillax mode that okay, we wanted to develop it, now we successfully developed it, right? Done and dusted. Yeah, let me go grab book my holidays and fly away. So that's the mood we everyone get into, right? Almost every time. So most teams monitor uptime, accuracy, and just stop there. Okay, it is behaving, right? But until how far does that behave? How exactly are you measuring that? So all of these things post deployment really comes to the rescue, right? So this is where AI risk quietly compounds and possibly exponentiates at times. And what exactly you do? You take a decision like IPM, asking employees to come back, and they don't trust their AI anymore. Yeah. So not being sarcastic or picking a bone against the IBM is a great company, but that's what it happens, right? In my experience, every life cycle stage, yeah, please go ahead, do your assessment, right? Just don't wait for development deployment. Yeah, cover everything possible. But yeah, post deployment almost every time, unfortunately.
So, Sai, are you saying we can't take vacation after the thing goes live? I think
I wish I could, but yeah, you know.
I'm with the vacation. No, but genuinely speaking, the teams have worked hard, right? They worked from
Yeah,
planning, from gathering, from evaluating, you name it. So there's
yeah.
definitely a moment where you're like, oh, we did it. We're live. Everything is working as expected. All disciplines have been applied, et cetera, et cetera. But we cannot relax because, like I said, this learning mode of AI, it's going to be changing. That deployment go, it's just the starting point. It's not the end point.
Thank you both. Yeah, and so I got another question. I think I'll direct this one towards you, Nima. Um, who usually owns the failure when an AI system behaves incorrectly?
Oh my goodness, that's a hard one, but I think it's the business for sure. Whoever is benefiting from the output of this thing, right, is the ultimate owner of the risk profile. So for example, when we still have a tendency, right, there's a vendor involved, there's a model involved, there's algorithm involved. But at the end of the day, it's intended to solve a business problem, right? Whether it's HR, whether it's sales, procurement, whatever you name it, pick a department, and that becomes whoever is heading that department, to me, is the ultimate owner for that particular product. So that distinction allows people to be at the top of this thing and not the AI itself.
Thank you, Nima and Sai. So I think I'll take one more question here. Uh, I'll direct this one towards you. Nima, how do teams usually define acceptable failure for AI systems?
One thing I know, it should not be defined while you're deploying things, right? Acceptable, not acceptable, threshold have to be defined as part of your enterprise risk program. And what AI changes is now that it's introducing new risks, then you adjust that threshold based on the changes that are happening within the industry. It should always be first, you've established a governance structure, you've established an enterprise threshold for risk appetite and risk threshold. And then you take all of that thing and say, is it still applicable for this new technology? Technology should not be shifting things as the organization is already operating. So my stance and answer to this one is there should already be a decision on what's acceptable within the organization, and then take AI and just embed it into that decision.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll give about another minute until like if there's any more questions popping in. Okay, yeah, I think we have another question. Sai, I'll direct this one towards you. How do you typically monitor AI risk post deployment early enough?
Good question, Yaver. How exactly do we monitor post-deployment, right? Usually we look out for a few metrics out there, right? How exactly is it behaving? How accurately are the simplest of responses are coming up, right? And all of this is there, but testing it with unintended use cases, right? Negative stress scenarios, okay? You where the AI is being able to explain its response. Okay, so whatsoever you are trying to ask is invalid for some reason, and this is the reason, right? So this is what I knew about it. Or at least let the user know your limitations. Okay, I'm not allowed to do this, or I'm not trained on to do this. Even that gives the end user clarity. So these kind of checks post deployment phase will give them more confidence that okay, while facing the actual user, it is the AI system is working as intended. It is
That's
one
100.
example of it, and there are many that yeah, but with a given interest of time, and I have to be respectful. I'm just taking one of the major scenarios which really works real time. Just do the stress testing. Just do fuzzing, right? Fuzz it with a lot of data. Check
Mhm.
with a minimalistic, simplest questions possible. Okay, so that's how I think you need to work on things post deployment.
100%. I think once it's deployed, now you have agents working, you have non-human identities working, you have access to visibility. I don't know how much authorization these agents are working. So there's a ton of things that could go wrong post deployment. And so we should always consider what actions is he taking, how much approval, if there's a human in the middle to validate the actions, and then move forward from there.
Thank you, Nima and Sai. And I love all these questions. I think these are types of questions that all teams should be asking. I think AI risk is not about removing uncertainty, it's about being clear upfront and how much uncertainty you're willing to run in production. So, with that, I want to thank everyone for the questions, and I want to thank everyone for joining today. And thank you, Nima and Sai, for your wonderful expertise on this subject.
No problem,
This
no
is a
problem. I just wish all of us treat security as an culture, as our ethic, as our responsibility, right? Before thinking anything about some shiny things, especially like AI, right? So they're there. There will be they will be there. But how exactly are you enabling your business still being secure, right?
correct.
Just do that homework right. We as
Eh,
security professionals, we don't want to always police around you saying, don't do this, don't do that. You might get into trouble. No, we are here to only let you know that, okay, let's do this together. We are in this together,
Yes.
but this is the right way to do that. So when we
Mhm.
choose the right, hardest right to do, then the easier wrong, right? It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of acumen coming in, a new one which you are not prepared for, right? But yeah, please be better embracing that change. It will be worth it. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us, Yavar. Thank you, Nima.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you.